Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Archippus podcast. Today, Mason and I are really excited to share with you an interview we did with Joshua Stock. Josh does outreach ministry in the realm of skiing and snowboarding through an organization called Snowboarders and Skiers for Christ. We had an awesome conversation just hearing about Josh's story, how God has called him into that outreach opportunity. And at Archippus, we believe that God has called every Christian to do good work for the sake of the kingdom and to glorify and honor God. And so it was really cool to hear someone tell their story of how God called them into what to many people would seem to be a surprising ministry opportunity through the realm of snowboarding. And so it's just an awesome opportunity to hear how God is doing work in a very particular calling and how Josh had lived up to follow that calling. So without further ado, I want to welcome you to this interview conversation. I hope that it is a great blessing to you in your life and encourages you to pursue whatever work and calling that God is calling you to do.
Hey, Josh. Thank you for joining us again to just talk about you and your life and your story. Before we get into any of that, just in a very, very brief manner, would you be able to tell us like what you are currently doing right now?
Sure. I'm sitting on here on this podcast with you guys. That's what Yeah. So right now, I am living in Colorado. I live at a ski resort called Copper Mountain. I help to run a little community church there. We just sort of volunteer together with a handful of people. There's like 7 of us who are leading. And and then we run a nonprofit called Snowboarders and Skiers for Christ, that we've been working with. I've been working with for 20 years, something like that. And I was working as the international director for a while. Now we've got a support office of about 7 or 8 people who support these people who see their mountain towns, their skiing and their snowboarding as a mission field, as an opportunity to share the gospel with people and to build communities in about 100 ski towns around the world. So we work with about 400 volunteers who oversee different kinds of ministry, different kind of missions in about 100 ski towns in about 15 countries. So I help run that support office that works with those people to encourage them and build them up and help to teach them how to, we say, be a light on the hill, to be the light of Jesus out on the mountain. In this culture it is pretty dark. Skiing, snowboarding's often associated with partying and people will take a year off to go ski and snowboard or whatever, work at a mountain. And it's a pretty dark lifestyle. And so we feel like, man, somebody needs to be the light of Jesus here. And so that's what we encourage people to do. And that's my regular day job. And it is a real job. Some people think, some people question whether it's a real mission. And I did too. And honestly, we'll probably get into that, but it's a bizarre, it's a weird life.
That's awesome. That sounds so cool.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I was one of those who, when Alex first told me, he's like, "Hey, I want to interview this snowboarder guy, who's using it for a platform for Jesus." So I was like, that was the first thought that came to my mind. Unfortunately, I have to confess is that's not a real job. And then I was like, wait, what am I doing? This is like totally like that's not of Jesus. That very thought right there.
Yeah, I get that often. I get that. I mean, we get that from family, friends, churches. Other people that don't get it. But we didn't either. When we first started, we said, could this even be a real thing? Which is part of my story is learning that there's mission everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the main goals, of our project of Archippus is to help Christians realize that every occupation, every part of this world is a mission, and that all Christians have good work to do there. Yeah. So thank you for joining us again. I know this is the first time you and I have been able to talk like over video chat. We've been able to see each other's face. I've heard a lot about you, Josh, from our mutual friend. And I mean, the little bits that I've heard about you, you seem like your story seems like, I don't know, the raddest life a person could live, because like all I really know about you is that you're the drummer in a ska band, right?
Yeah.
And then you moved
True.
across the country and then just started doing snowboarding ministry.
Yes.
And for me, that's like, I don't know, like the X Games equivalent of the Christian life.
Basically,
Is
what Alex is saying, that you're his hero. You're living the life he wants to live.
Man,
Being
no
in a
pressure,
ska
no
punk
pressure.
band and doing extreme sports and doing all of it for the glory of Christ is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
So why don't you just tell us about your story? How'd you come to faith? And how did you feel a call into going into this specific mission work?
Yeah. Wow, pressure's on now. So yeah, I grew up in a small, little town, coal mining town called New Germany. It was actually full of Polish people, but it was called New Germany. I don't know. Anyway, my dad was a coal miner. His dad was a coal miner before him. We lived out in the woods, and I had three brothers. There were four of us. My mom had four boys under the age of 5. So it was like a rowdy lot, just a very loud and active home. So we grew up just playing sports and just being active. My parents were Catholic. It was a very Catholic town. And so we started Catholic school and stuff. And then my parents came to faith really through a charismatic Catholic movement. And they, after a couple of years, left the Catholic Church, and my dad started hanging out with this coal miner buddy of his who was part of this Christian Missionary Alliance church. And so we heard a lot about missions as kids. And the Christian Missionary Alliance, it comes from kind of holiness movement. And so a lot of our sports were considered idols, and you have to like give those things up, as kids. That's kind of how we heard it, whether it was said that way or not. It was just sort of like, I wrestled as a kid with like, I really want to play sports and be good at skateboarding and snowboarding and all the things that we were interested in. But also I knew that God, I don't know, wanted my allegiance, wanted me on his side. And it felt like I had to give up one for the other. And so I listened to missionaries coming in off the mission field and was inspired by their stories, and really felt probably the first call on my life to missions. I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and this is kind of a funny story. You got time for a story?
Yeah.
Tell a story.
I got a handful of them. And so I'm like at this like youth camp, this church camp, and I was a teenage. I was maybe like 12, 13 years, like middle school age, and my older brothers were not well behaved, and so I just followed suit. I was not well behaved, and I was setting off fireworks under the camp counselor's cabin, and I was like getting in trouble and just being an idiot, just being a kid, and kind of a punk. And he tried to kick me out the next morning, and my mom was the youth leader, and she had like a dozen other kids. She's like, "Listen, you can't send him home because like I'm here and he has to stay." So he let me stay, and I went to this lady who had come off the mission field. She was retired. She was 70s or 80s, and she was talking about her life on the mission field, and all the other kids were like, they had like brought pillows. It was like super disrespectful. It was terrible. But I was there, man, and every word, I was just hanging on every word. And I came out of that and told my mom, I said, "Mom, when that lady was talking, she was talking about, God ushering her into heaven and saying, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant.' And like, that's what I want. I think God was like calling me to be a missionary." And she laughed. My mom laughed and was like, "You? Like, no way." Cause I was just kind of a trouble kid. I was like, ADHD, could not pay attention, was not a great student, all those things. But I came out of that and knew that God was asking me, he had this calling on my life to go to the mission field. And I, for probably the next 5 or 6 years, coming through middle school, high school, I struggled with that because I was like, man, I don't want to have to give up all my stuff. Like, we have our identity, especially as kids, like, and with brothers and everything, like you have your identity wrapped up in how good you are at a thing, or, your hobbies and all that stuff. And it's, it's not even much different now as an adult, but our identity is so wrapped up in that stuff. So it was really hard for me to wrestle with my faith as a middle school, high school kid, knowing there was this like sneaky nagging, like God calling me to missions in the back of my mind that I couldn't really put to rest. And so that's sort of how I came to faith. It wasn't necessarily through my family, but also my family, my parents were believers, and we as the boys, my dad actually became a pastor. He got hurt as a coal miner when I was about 13, 14, around that age. And he was like, I'm going back to school to be a pastor. And we're like, no. And he was like, you guys are going to have to you're going to be pastors' kids now. You're going to have to straighten up. And actually, I think that sort of turned us even a little more rebellious. But my older brothers, they were into skateboarding. And I remember my brother actually brought home a snowboard one day from school. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's that thing? And he's like, it's, I took it from some girl at school, don't touch it. And so as soon as he left the house, I took it out onto Granddad's little hill that was just, it's 100 feet long, strapped in the top and rode down the bottom, was like, dude, this is everything. I don't know. I guess as an adolescent, you're trying to discover yourself. And I was like, man, this is it. And I went out, and my mom, they didn't have any money or whatever, but I was like, Mom, I need a snowboard. And she's like, no, you don't, because we don't have money for a snowboard. And so I borrowed my granddad's lawnmower, dude, and just got to work that summer and crushed it and bought my first snowboard. And it was just it was just a part of my identity. It was so deep in me from there that I just couldn't get away. But I constantly wrestled with that, God, I know you want me to give this up and lay this down. And it wasn't until after high school, actually, I went to college, dropped out of college with a 4.0. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was trying to do my own thing. And I actually gave up snowboarding that year because I knew that I was wrestling with God, what do you want me to do with my life? What do you want me to do with my life? And I gave up snowboarding for a year and gave a bunch of my stuff away. And it was in that process that he said, dude, you know what I called you to. Very specifically, one night I remember it, he was like, you know what I called you to? Why do you keep asking me? Why do you keep asking me? And so I went to this thing, and my wife, but she was my girlfriend at the time. We went to this thing, and this guy was like, hey, I'm going to pray for all you kids. And God's going to reveal to you, that he'll reveal to you, what it is he wants you to do. And I was like, oh no, because I know what God wants you to do. And so I'm there and I'm praying, and the whole time in service, dude, almost as audible as it can get, you know what I called you to do? Why do you keep asking me? Quit faking. And so we go up to the front at the end of the sermon, and he's like, dude, I'm gonna pray for all these kids. And there's 100 kids, and I run up to the front of the line, and then it turns out he starts at the back of the line. He's praying through all these people, and dude, it's an hour-long process. It's such a big deal. But he gets to my wife, and she's the next person down from me. And dude, in my mind, I'm he didn't say missionary to one single person. So I'm pretty much off scot-free, And he gets to my wife, and he goes to lay hands to pray for her, and he goes, I think God's given you a missionary's heart. And I was like, no. And I lost it. And I was bawling, dude. I just started bawling. And the guy comes to me. He's like, God's probably already told you what he wants to do. I'm like, oh, snotty.
Did you shout no in the moment?
Yeah, dude. I was like, no. And I mean, I just knew. I knew that I had been called a long time ago. And I'd been just wrestling with it, running away from it. And it came down to this point where God was like, dude, you're running, you're Jonah, are you going to go and do the thing that I asked you to do? And will you trust me with it? And I think that was a problem. I didn't trust him. I thought he was going to take all of the things away from me that gave me joy. And that's not at all what he was doing.
Yeah, no, I find...
Sorry, that was a long way to answer your one question.
Okay. Yeah. And hopefully, Alex, you don't mind me jumping in here, because there were a couple of things that you said, Josh. I was like, oh gosh, that is worth dissecting and pointing out a little bit more. I found a lot of similarities in your story to my own story, and I'm not going to go into detail sharing my story here. But there were just some things that you said that I was like, okay, we really need to talk about that. Was that idea of, well, I know God has called me to this, but he's also given me these passions over here, and I must let go of these passions and do ministry in this traditional mindset and way of thinking. And so many times, what you see in scripture is it's not God saying, or sometimes he's like, you need to leave this behind, but other times it's you need to rethink how you do this. So I think of Peter, and he's like, hey, you're a fisherman. I'm going to teach you to be a fisher of men. And he's like, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to do it in a kind of different mindset. Or Matthew is a tax collector with such a, high thinking mind. He's like, I want to use you to to write the Gospel of Matthew, basically, of something that has such high detail of going back to the Old Testament so many times. And so it's one of those, like, sometimes we wrestle with, here's what I'm interested in, and here's what just gives me like my heart on fire, passion, and I also know God has this for me, and I can't see how these two come together. But many times it's like God's like, I've given you both of these to figure out how to bring them together for what I've called you to do. Yeah,
I think essentially to me it was, I had used all my passions for like mostly for selfish reasons. And so it wasn't the passion that was wrong. They just need redeemed, they needed reconciled. In the same way God redeems us and reconciles us, brings us back into a right relationship with him. He can do that for our passions. Can I give another story?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm a storyteller by nature, I think. So I, sort of fast forward after I knew what I was called to, I started like looking online. I was like, man, I need to find a college. Like I have no money, I'm working as like a ski instructor or whatever. And I'm like, I've got no money. I don't know how to find a college that I'm going to be able to pay for and then like go to the mission field and be able to like pay it back. And so I'm like researching all these colleges, and in the process, I'm like, dude, it'd be sick to go to one that has a good soccer team. Cause I like grew up playing soccer and loved it. It was like, just, I was like, again, my passions were like tied in, and I was like, is that even okay, God? Like, would it be okay for me? And so in the process, I find this organization called Ultimate Goal Ministries, and they do these soccer mission trips. And their first, like the soonest one was like in a couple weeks. It was like, hey, the payment's due by like next Friday. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. As soon as I saw it, I was like, and this is like before Google. I don't even know how you research things before Google. This is like 2001. Was Google around? I don't know. Maybe we Yahoo'd
things. Maybe a baby format.
Anyway, I like find these guys, and I like go to my parents, and I'm like, hey, listen, like, I know I'm like sort of dabbling with missions, but like, I want to know if this is like legit or not. And so my dad's like, dude, stand up in church and share what God's been doing in your heart. Cause like lots of people know your process, like what you've been wrestling with. And so just share it. And if people support it, then great. And so I stand up the next Sunday, and I'm like, hey, there's this mission thing. It's soccer based, which I know sounds weird, but like they go overseas and they're like building houses, and they're like ministering, like playing soccer, like in prisons and like ministering to people. And I'm like, I want to try this to see, it sounds out there, but it seems like, dude, this is Josh, like this is like part of who I am. And so I needed like $1,200 by Friday or whatever. And so I stand up and I'm like, hey, I'm a kid with no cash at all. Driving a borrowed car, just all the things. And, just dropped out of college. And so a couple people hear it, and they're like, yes, this is you, dude. Like, and so like I ended up raising more money than I needed. This is like the first time I'd ever been on a plane. I like fly and meet these guys in Texas, and we like link up with this team and drive down into Mexico. And it's like, there's maybe like 6 or 8 of us like gringos, like in central Mexico. Like they were like, dude, these kids have never seen white folk, and you're like, dude, what? Like, and so like, I don't speak barely any Spanish. Like I had a couple of classes in high school, but and we're just like a bunch of gringo kids. And we're like 3 or 4 days in, and they drop us off in this tiny little town in the middle of Mexico, with a soccer ball. And there's a basketball court, and they're like, hey, just start kicking around on the basketball court. We'll be back for you in a little bit. And we're like, maybe this is like 20 years ago. Maybe we don't do things like this exactly anymore. But we're like, yo, we don't speak the language, and we don't know anybody. And they're like, just start kicking around and we'll be back. And we're like, there's nobody here. What do we do? And they're like, start kicking around. We'll be back. And so we like, all right, whatever. A couple like high school and college like age gringos, we just start like pinging the ball back around. Dude, within 30 minutes, there was like a band started playing. These guys came out and were like grilling like asada. They were like cooking, and there were like 8 teams that wanted to play against the gringo kids. And so we played for probably 3 or 4 hours just playing on this dirty basketball court. And I mean, like crowds of people and this tiny village, like every human who lived in the village, like came out to see this like spectacle of let's all beat the gringo kids. And so we play for hours. And at the end of the night, they're like, okay, now one of the guys is going to stand up and share the gospel. And so this dude stands up in Spanish, and I didn't know much then. So he's just sharing. And these guys we've been playing soccer with, they like have their arms around us. They're like crying and stuff. And they're like, pray for them, pray for them. We're like, we only speak English. And they're like, it doesn't matter. Like, just pray for them. And we're like, okay. So I'm like praying for this dude, and he's like crying, and I'm like, God, this is so weird. Like, here I am, like coal miner town kid in the middle of Mexico. I don't speak the language. All I know is this like ball game. Like it was this like language that we spoke. And I looked over, and there was a ball sitting in the middle of the court. And if you ever played with a soccer ball on a basketball court, it's just like nasty and grungy and beat up. Mm-hmm. And we're like middle of desert, and I looked at this ball, and it was just filthy. And I was like, that's my connection. Like, that's my ticket. That's the language that I spoke. Mm-hmm. And dude, it was just like ping, light bulb went off. And I was like, all of those years of me using this kid's game, like it's a kid's ball, kick it, run. Like the simplest child's game I used for my own selfish desires, for my identity, for everything. And you were allowing me to be trained in that language, the language of the game, that now is not a toy anymore. It's a tool. And so this thing that used to be a toy that just gave me pleasure or whatever is now this tool that I get to use to build eternity. Like, I'm ushering this guy that I don't even speak the same language with into eternity right now. Like, this guy is going to heaven because I played a kid's game. And I was like, man, our toys, they're tools when they're redeemed. Like you were saying, when we redeem this thing that just used to bring me pleasure and bring me glory, and God redeems that, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been trained in this tool, in this art, in this language, that now God's saying, see, I wanted you to use this. This is where I have you. This is your mission. This is what I've been training you for. And all those years using it for the wrong reasons, I was allowing you to do that because I'm training you for something greater. And it's like, boom, dude, after that, I was like, somebody needs to do this in the snowboard world, because it's so dark and it's party hard. I was like, man, somebody needs to do this with snowboarding. And I didn't know that some guys had already started it in New Zealand like 2 years before that realization ever came to me.
So what does that look like now for you? Like, to transfer, like, what is that? Because I have no experience with snowboarding or skiing, or so, like, this is like the first, I would never even guess that there was this darkness in that community. So can you elaborate more on, what does that look like, and what do you guys do in light of that? And,
Sure.
explain this ministry and this mindset that you have and bring it into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think of maybe a college town, like a college town is super transient, right? People move in and then they move out, and they move in, they move out. And it's like a different crop comes through. The snowboard and ski world works like that. It's already a seasonal sport. We've got like 3 little towns here around us. And there are 3, 4, 5 resorts just like close to here. And every year we get about 5,000 young people who move in to work the jobs at the resort. Like my resort over where I live, 1,500 employees in the winter. And they serve beers, they bump chairs, they run the infrastructure of the whole thing. But then once April 30th comes, they're all gone because there's nothing, it's just a seasonal sport. And so it's a seasonal place. So people come in for about 6 months. Most of them are young people who they want a year off after high school or a year off after college. And they're like, man, I'm going to go party all night. I'm going to ski all day. It's going to be so sick. And then they get here and they're working 2 jobs just to make ends meet because it's so expensive to live here. And they're living in like a closet sized room with like some stranger, and they're stealing their stuff. And like, they just sort of come on hard times real quick. And because they've left their support system, they've had to leave family and home and community and church and all the things they've left to come to this place, and they don't know anybody. They like come on hard times real fast. And so it creates this like really disjointed sort of community where there's like 3 times the national suicide rates. Like people are they just come on hard times and they don't have anybody to turn to. And so it's our heart to, when we first moved in, we were like, man, it's tough to live here, and we're working on the hill with all these guys, and we're like, dude, how does anybody make it here? And we realized that the churches actually have resources. There's a handful of churches in town, and they want to meet needs, but most of them are filled with retirement age folks. Because the ski town's where people like to retire too. We always say there's like people pre-career and post-career that fill up a ski town. There's like nobody in the middle can have a family and still ski, and so we're like, man, it's kind of a shame that there's all these young kids who are up on the mountain there in the park. They're like part of the culture, like part of the cool, into tricks, trying to get sponsored, like all the things that whatever. It's just like a cool way of life for a little bit, and they have needs. But they're not coming into a church. And the church has resources and they want to meet needs, but they're not going out into the park. The grandmas are not hitting rails with the kids, like, it's just like it's like never the two shall meet. And we were like, man, what if somebody was bridging that gap and helping the people with the resources meet the needs and helping the people with the needs come to meet the people with the resources? We were like, man, somebody needs to bridge that gap, And so for us, it became really clear really quickly that, man, we are the bridge. We are, and if you go to the scripture where it says we as believers have been given the ministry of reconciliation, that the word reconciliation can almost also mean bridge. Like you're bridging. We're as ambassadors to Christ. God was making a way for us, and we're making a way. And it actually says we've been given the ministry of reconciliation that we might reconcile all things back to God. Like we have that ability and we have that responsibility, and for us, I was super into snowboarding. I was like trying to get sponsored and do all the things, and like ran up through, did all of the riding for companies and stuff. But like I had earned credibility the same way with soccer. Like I had earned credibility by getting good. We always so they call it shredding. We would say shreddability, credibility. Like if you can rip on the hill, then like you actually earn credibility real quick with people. Yeah. And it was something that I was using it for me. And then when I realized that the toy had become the tool, it flipped and was like, oh dude, we can meet people super easily on the mountain because we're out there riding. We have credibility with them. And we're going, dude, let me meet some needs. You want to come over for dinner tonight? We're going to cook and like bring your skis and snowboard. We're going to wax them for free. We got free wax from these guys downtown. And we just started like serving people, to start to build that bridge with them, so that we might introduce some people to Jesus, and also that we could meet real practical needs, because people see that you love them and you care for them. Especially, so we always say there's like, we're in a selfish culture, right? It's everybody who's here is like, either I'm retiring or like I'm going to get some for me before I get a real job. Like everybody's here with like a selfish motive. And we're like, man, if you can be selfless in a selfish culture, then you stick out like a sore tailbone. Like you stick out. People, you will be noticed when you act selflessly. And so we do like free PBJ in the park. We're like making sandwiches and hooking people up and like just doing like do-goodery, like just nice things for people. And they're like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, first of all, we love you. We think that people are important. Jesus said it, and it like gives you credibility to even earn the right to be heard, And so what we do is we teach this set of values that help people to bridge their culture back to Jesus and work with the local church. We teach these values because we go, these couple values that we have are simple kingdom values: believing, building relationships, our identity, the way we do, the gospel, and then engaging. It actually spells bridge. Clever little acronym play on words there. But
God loves his acronyms.
The church loves their acronyms. But we teach people how to do this because we're like, hey, listen, you won't always be a skier or a snowboarder. Like it's a transient culture. We just expect turnover. But if we build kingdom values into our leaders for these like 2 or 3 years that they're here, no matter what they go on to do next, they're becoming disciples, right? They're becoming disciples, and we get to be a part of discipling every nation, like every tribe, in this weird little quirky transient setting, we get to build the kingdom so that wherever they go next, they already they're mission minded and they have these values that are values of any disciple of Jesus. Sorry, that was really long way. Again,
No, that was great. Josh,
Sorry,
could you
long-winded.
could you give us a story maybe of a really clear example? I love how you told the story of going to Mexico and getting involved in that soccer ministry and how soccer went from a toy to a tool. One of the things that I really appreciate about like extreme sports is people involved in like snowboarding, skateboarding. They don't see that sport just as like athletic. They often view it as an art form. Like I love how Rodney Mullen talks about skateboarding as a sport and an art form. And a lot of people refer to the arts as this universal language. Like when you look at music, you don't even need to know the language the song's in. You
Sure.
immediately can identify the themes and the emotions it evokes. And so how have you seen the tool of snowboarding almost function as a universal language where you might have a lot of cultural barriers with a person, whether it's generational or lifestyle, being a Christian, having a very different lifestyle. You have all these cultural barriers, but how have you seen the tool of snowboarding function as a universal language that helps cut through those cultural barriers and then actually speak to people and lead them into the way of Jesus?
Sure. I think I love your skateboarding example because that's how I got into snowboarding. My brothers it was like the late 80s when Pal Peralta, the Bones Brigade, and Rodney Mullen was like he was like a Grom at the time, but like that's how we got into it. And skateboarding brought a new, it's an individual sport, it's a sport of expression, unlike soccer or football or basketball, whatever. Like you can do tricks and stuff, like which we always thought was cool. That's why I like soccer. You can do like tricks. But like that sort of expression is the creative bug, the mini creator that got it. Like God has created us in his image. He, the creator, created us mini creators in his image. And that's part of us living into that redemption. Yeah. Where we create not just for ourselves or not create Tower of Babel or not create, something that glorifies me, but something that glorifies God. And so when we understand that I am a mini creator in the beautiful redemptive model of the creator, then it makes everything we get to do, like you said, music or whatever, it makes it more, not just like self-expressive, but like expressive of like, it's a worship. It's a form of worship to be able to. And I ride with people like I'm like an old guy now. Like I just like ride weird and wear weird stuff. And like, I've just sort of embraced the, like, you're an oddball already. And we talk about it with people too. We're like, hey, listen, if you're a snowboarder for Jesus, like, you're in your Christian circles, you're like a snowboarder. So you're kind of out there, you're kind of weird. And if you're a Christian with your snowboarder friends, you're a Christian. And so you're kind of out there. We're like, you're not really accepted in either of those two camps. Yeah. And so you're like an oddball. And that's not just okay. It's not just okay, but like that is good. Like God created you very specifically in a way that not a lot of other people were created. And your uniqueness, your individuality is actually a beautiful thing that he wants you to live into and express yourself in. And so that will preach. Like you're on it, Alex, you're on it already. But maybe some examples of the way that's worked for us. For a while we were like we started just ministering to people here and I started like getting sponsors and like just became an athlete here just because we were just out there all the time and you're working on your art, essentially. And so as we got sponsors, more places were like, hey, would you like come out and do a demo, or would you come out and like teach a camp? Would you come out and like teach some kids? And so we like fell into this, like we were making videos and stuff, but we were also running camps and teaching kids and we started sending teams around and people saw what we were doing here. They saw that we were loving on our community and it was starting to grow into something. And we were having these like wax nights and there would be like 100 people like crammed in a basement with like solo cups of like these coffee drinks that we were making and stuff. And it felt like college, like frat party, but like in the weirdest way. We were just an alternative to the party scene and people caught wind of that. And so these guys in Utah were like, hey, can you come teach us how to do what you're doing there? And we're like, we don't even really know what this is exactly. Like there's no like franchise or like model yet. Yeah. There's no template really. And And then these guys in Oregon, these guys in New York, and like people started saying, will you come and teach us? And we're like, okay, well, let's figure it out. And so we would like go and film, and then we would like maybe run a camp, and so we like started SFC USA. And so we started like branching out and running all these camps and doing all this stuff. And after about 7 or 8 years, the guys who had started the organization in New Zealand were like, hey dude, you guys need to just run, you guys are crushing, like just take all the everything, like the international stuff. And we're like, dude, we don't know what we're doing really. We're just making it up as we go. It's like that parenting thing. You're like, dude, I'll just make it up. Yeah. And so we're just making the thing up as we go. And so we're asked to go internationally, and we're like, man, listen, we're Americans. We already have like people, there's not a good stereotype of like white male American man coming in to tell us what to do. I'm like, man, listen, that is not our heart. Like that's so not our heart that I think for the first 3 years, we just go and serve. We don't teach anything. We just go and serve and say, hey, we love you. We just want to support you, encourage you in your context. Because the French guys, I don't know how to minister in French. You know, like the French Alps, all I know is like cheese and wine and some skiing. I don't know anything about that. Which I don't know, use that's probably a good model. But so like we're like, oh, we're just going to go and serve. And so we ended up in like Slovakia and Czech Republic and like some of these like backwater, you know, like we like did a trip to Switzerland and we're like, oh, this is swanky. But then like we ended up in these tiny little towns where nobody would go. And we were in the Czech Republic, and they had like less than an inch of snow. So it was like just like these old cow fields with like this much snow. And they're like, dude, like don't even come. Like don't bring your team. And we're like, no, dude, we're coming. We're going to figure it out. And so we like scraped together this, like the snow, like scraping it out of the grass into like these tiny little like patches where we could like hit a rail or whatever. And we're teaching these kids who had like never learned to snowboard, but we have like these professional athletes who are there riding and like trying hard tricks and encouraging each other, and then like getting the kids involved. And we've heard countless times, especially that trip, they were like, dude, no one would do this. Like all the cool snowboarders, they like go and do the thing like for glory, you know, like for the fame or for the, you know, cause it's already a sport that you can only be really elite at for like 3 to 5 years, you know, like, and so they're like going to get them some, you know, and they're like, you guys have flipped the script and have brought really good snowboarding and really kind people who are praying for kids and serving kids and doing things in a way that no one would do. And so it's like attracted the attention of all these other towns. And now they want you to like come and run a camp on their little grassy hill. And like, it just became a thing where when we served in a way that was selfless, people took notice and they were like, man, what are you doing here? And it gives you the opportunity to say, man, Jesus said that every one of his creation is important. Everyone is special. And like our heart is to give back. God's given us, you know, we want to give back, and it gives you the opportunity to speak the gospel in a way that's coming from this weird platform that, you know, you wouldn't normally have, that God's like gifted to you. You thought was for your glory, but like God has spun it and you get to use it for his glory. And then like kids will grow up and they become believers and they're like sprouting churches and they're like going off to Bible school. And you're like, dude, from snowboarding, from like this stupid kids game of like riding like sliding on a piece of fiberglass down like frozen water on a tiny hill. Like what a bizarre, it seems so insignificant. And I'm sure that probably most of your listeners will go, dude, I'm passionate about what? Like crocheting? Like no matter what, whatever the thing is, I don't know who you're like, like whatever the thing is though, like what you're into coding, you're into like whatever you're into, it feels insignificant when done with the earthly mindset. But like God will, when the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Almighty lives in you, nothing is insignificant. No act is insignificant. You know, I'm not a guy who like works out much, but I like recently have been trying to get in shape because I'm old. And I was listening to this guy the other day and he's like, dude, listen, sometimes I like have 5 minutes and I'm like, all right, that's not enough for like a gym workout, but like it's enough. You know, like just doing a little is enough because it's better than doing nothing. And we always talk about that as like, man, even your most insignificant act, Jesus said, like, a cup of water in my name. You know what I mean? Like, a cup of water in my name. And it's like, even the most insignificant act, when done with the power of the creator, like the creator that spoke and billions of galaxies sprung into existence, like that same creator lives in you. Like the power of he that spoke billions of galaxies into existence lives in you. And so there's nothing insignificant about any action you take. Dude, I'm preaching. I'm going to stop.
You go ahead. No, you go ahead.
You're on fire.
I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, wow. So you go from, hey, let's just, in the beginning, if I got this right, the storyline here, hey, let's go snowboard and then invite someone over for dinner and just be kind to them.
Yeah.
To from that end up growing this international ministry. And it's one of those, you're like, that probably wasn't your goal. Like, here's how we're going to do this step by step. No. Or, it's just like, many people were like, oh, I want to do something really big like that. And oh, I can't do that. But then it's, God always calls us into the small, selfless moments and let those just build and build like snowballs. And it's just one of those, I'm like, wow, that is really inspiring because, especially if you are someone who has this big dream of, I want to, I'm driven. I want to have this big thing, for God. And it's like, well, it starts with the little cup of water and making PJs in the PB&Js in the park and just invite someone over to dinner and be a little selfless in a selfish culture and just let that build over time.
Yeah, and it wasn't planned, like you said. Like, I mean, it was not. Even doing this, like I had that fleeting thought as like somebody should do this in snowboard world, and then I went back to a college and ended up finding SFC on again. We weren't Googling. I'm not sure how I found, but I ended up in Japan. I ended up in Japan with these guys and spent the season there, and was like, man, I was studying cross-cultural missions, so I was like, man, Japan needs Jesus, and so I finished my schooling, and right in the last couple months of my schooling, I had this plan. My wife and I were going to get married. We were going to move out to the West Coast, learn Japanese, and we're going to move to Japan and blah, blah, blah. And I had all this, like I had extra schooling and all these things that were planned out, and they all fell through in one day. So I'm like, dang it, what's going on? Like, there's something weird. And it was like 6 weeks until I was like done with school. I'm like, God, this is not the time for all my plans to fall apart. And so I like drive back out to Seven Springs, this little resort where I was working back outside of Pittsburgh, and talked to my boss, and I was like, hey, like, this is my plan B, because like plan A fell through this morning. And they were like, hey, like, you're not going to have a job this summer. We actually like have to chop the staff. And I'd been doing all this like extra work and stuff for free. And I was like, wait, what? They're chopping me? And so I'm driving back in my car to my school. It's like an hour drive, and I'm yelling at God. I'm like, we had plans, dude. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, how am I going to get to Japan? How am I going to do? Like, you called me to be a missionary. What are you doing? And I was furious. And by the time I got back to my school, I pulled into the parking lot after an hour of yelling at God. And this dude called, this number I'd never knew, calls me. I think it's flip phone back then. So it was like, Shka. And I'm like, hello, who is this? And it's this dude I met in Japan who, had like sort of jokingly said, dude, one day we should start SFC in the US. And he's like, oh dude, what are you doing? I'm like, where have you been? I tried to get a hold of you for like the last 2 years. I've got other plans now. And he's like, dude, you should move to Colorado. Like we went up there last week, my wife and I, and we prayed over the place, and we were like, man, God is like, this is it. God wants us to start Snowboarders for Christ here, but we can't do it without Josh. And I was like, dude, you called it the weirdest minute. Like, I was pulling into my parking space. I would have had plans. If you would have called yesterday, I would have had plans. If you would have called in like an hour from now, I probably would have come up with new plans. I'm like, dude, you called it the weirdest minute. I haven't talked to you in 2 years, like, and I didn't even know your phone number. Like, how did you even get my number? And so I was like, dude, listen, I'm in, because the timing of this is so bizarre. Like, it's so God timing. And I said, but listen, here's the deal. Here's my one part of the deal is I'm going to help you set this thing up for a year or two. I'm going to let you start your little snowboarding mission, but then I'm going to do real missions. Like, I'm going to do real missions. Literally, I was like, my wife and I are going to do real missions, because like all we knew of mission was cross-cultural mission, like overseas mission. And that's what I had, that's all I'd ever known. And even the Mexico trip, the soccer stuff was cross-cultural for me. And so my mind was only on something bigger, something, where I have to give up snowboarding and move to the jungle or whatever, and so I still didn't even have that in my mind until I moved here, and we moved in, got jobs, and we're like, what the heck do we do? And I'm like, crap, I said I'd help him for 2 years. I don't know what to do. Let's just get jobs at the Hill and we'll just start meeting people. And it literally just developed from crap, here we are. Now what do we do? We didn't have jobs. We didn't have a place to live. We didn't have anything. We moved to this town, all stupidly spontaneously. And we were like, okay, God, we know you want us to be here right now. What's that look like? And then all of those things developed as we were like, man, dude, there's these kids on the Hill who are desperate and struggling and hurting and could just use a home cooked meal. What if we just made a home cooked meal? And it was literally just by seeing these little needs in front of us as we prayed, we're like, man, somebody should cook them a meal. I don't know how to cook. I was making hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. I didn't know what to do, but we just it was just being faithful to those little things, those tiny little. Somebody needs help in front of me. Am I gonna help them? Are we gonna help them? Come on, guys, let's figure this out. And then it grew into this much bigger thing, and it was very much that will you be faithful in those small things that led us to even trying to define the thing. I mean, it was probably only 6 months in. I was like, shoot, God, this place is dark. You need to send somebody here. Somebody else really needs to do this ministry that you have me do. And then we were like, oh crap, this is it. And actually the more it dawned on us, the more it was like, oh, you have trained me for this. I speak the language already. I'm trying to get sponsored. I understand the people and the church at the time, we walked into the local church and we were like, hey, we want to Snowboarders for Christ. And they're like, yeah. The pastor, the first time I met him, he's like, dude, we'll see if you're even still here in a year, honestly. And I was like, they didn't get it either because it hadn't been developed really. The model of it hadn't been developed or even tested. We were just guinea pigging everything we did. And that felt fine at the time. I mean, some of it was man, we better prove ourselves. They doubt us. We'll show them. Some of it's just out of stubbornness. But the more we tried to meet those needs, the more we were like, man, it is so clear and so evident that God has trained us for this moment, for this mission right now. And I don't know. I hope that encourages somebody. The small things, man, they're not insignificant.
Mm-hmm. It's like the book of Acts. I imagine everyone, we read the book of Acts and you're like, these guys already knew what they were doing. It's every story is all right, God, we're in a new city for some reason and things are going well over there, but now we're here and it's a completely different place. What do you want us to do here?
Yeah.
And we always read these stories as if these guys already had these things figured out and mastered.
Yeah, they didn't have the New Testament even. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just kind of goes back to that of okay, look around. What are areas of need? What are you good at? And where might those blend together? And you can, look like Jesus in that moment.
Yeah. And I think it really takes we felt super desperate, honestly, because we were we don't know what we're doing. We're a bunch of 20s, young 20, just kooky. I didn't really have any real schooling, we didn't know what we were doing. And it really took some desperation. We were like, God, we need you to show up and help us out and give us some wisdom. And we prayed. I mean, those were our first meetings where there's 5, 6 of us in somebody's living room going, man, what are we doing here? Let's just seek the Lord together. We'll make some food and hang out and just pray because we don't know what we're doing. And that reliance, it creates reliance, desperation creates reliance. And so you're okay, God, we trust you. And I'm just going to take down every name and number that I meet a dude on the Hill, and I'm going to invite them to a thing and see how I can help them, how I can serve them. And that's part of just relying on the Spirit is what gives you that deep sort of, I don't know, sense of perseverance, a sense of almost provocation. It's oh man, I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you. And that puts every action into I don't know. It's it's blessed when you're expecting God to show up. he often shows up, like there's something in that desperation. He does. It's crazy. It's like, you've like created almost like a negative of like, I'm sucking myself out of this situation and going, God, we don't know what we're doing, dude. Like, please step up to help. And it creates that vacuum where God's like, I'll fill that, dude. You create that and you invite me in, I will fill that. And he did, man, in crazy ways. Like we saw funding that never should have come in to a bunch of kooky kids. Like we saw favor from big companies who were like, dude, we like what you guys are doing. And we're like, but it's for Jesus. And they're like, whatever. And it was like, I mean, we saw God move in crazy ways that were so encouraging just because we had this like urging and this like prodding of like, somebody's got to do this. And like, I'm here, Lord, send me, I'm here, send me, but I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And there was like a saying going around about, probably a dozen years ago that was like, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so God asks you to step up and it's the willing that he'll use, not the most gifted or whatever.
Yeah,
so maybe I do actually suck at snowboarding. I think maybe that's
I think God kind of wants us to be in that constant state of, God, if you don't show up, this is all going to crash and burn. And like, I have to be completely dependent on you. Like God doesn't like for anyone doesn't like lay out the entire plan of their life. It's just like, are you going to trust me with today? Are you going to trust me with today? And over and over and over. And like, honestly, like going back to thinking like of 2020, like right when the pandemic happened and everyone like within the first few weeks of it was sending out, here's your survival guide on how you'll get your church or your ministry through this season. And I was like unsubscribing from everyone. I was like, no one knows what they're doing and no one knows this time. And you can't come in and be like, I've got the answers. And here's what, it's like, this is a time when we should all be, God, we are entirely dependent on you, and if you don't show up, this is going to crash and burn. I can't listen to someone who's like, I've got the answers and figured out, and I know the plan that you need. Like, no, like it. And I think that's kind of where God constantly wants us to be is in this state of, all right, are you going to reach out and hold my hand today to cross the street? Kind of state.
And God will put us in those positions, or sometimes God will lead us through even seasons of pruning. Because God's goal is for us and our ministry, our mission to be evident, like Paul says, this is a work of God, not of man, that no man should be able to boast. It is purely a work of God. And so sometimes God will put us in those situations. He'll sometimes remove elements of our life or sometimes even remove the very things that he's gifted us with or reduce them. To humble us and to put us in that situation of like, this whole thing, this whole skill that I love doing, that I'm great at, it's not even from me. God, this is just a gift from you, and I have to rely on you. And I don't know, it's so tempting sometimes. The more we grow and the better we get at things, it can be so tempting to put our trust in the gifts that God has given us instead of the gift giver. Yeah. I mean, we're broken. Clearly we're broken and we're trying to patch ourselves up as best we can with whatever it is. If it's some sort of notoriety or what, I'm good at this thing or whatever, we'll use that. And it does take us sort of coming back to that. God, I lay this thing at your feet. If this is a thing you've redeemed and this is a thing you've reconciled, then teach me to use it for you. Yeah. And none of us is going to like fully figure it out. There's just like not a whole lot. Mason, you said like the early church, did you look at Acts and they're like, huh? Like, what are we doing? Like, we only ended up here because we got thrown out of that city. They were trying to murder us. Like, and even Paul in some of his letters, he's like, I don't know what you guys should do when you get together. Maybe like somebody sing a song, you sing there's a psalm, and then like, and then you're good. I don't like. They were just making it up. Like they didn't have a template, and God doesn't even. When does He give us a template? Like they tried to use the law as the template, and that was broken. Like they broke it. They found a way to break that too. Like I think that's honestly, I think that's probably like the original sin of Satan
Lucifer wanted to be like God. He was a control freak. He had a problem with control. And so do we. Like every one of our sins comes back to like, I want to be God. I want to be in control. I want to have it all figured out. I want to know exactly how everything's going to work. The future's going to be like, we all want like to be in control. We all desire that, but I think it's from a place of brokenness. Like we don't want to have to rely on the one who's in control. We want to be in control. I mean, I've got kids. Like I watch that every second of every day when they're awake. Even when they're not awake, they're trying to be in control. And so, like, I think that's part of it. I think you're onto it. It's like we want to have it all figured out. We want to know exactly what's next, and like that's just not reality. It was not reality for any of the people in the Bible in our past and through the church history. Like it's just not the example that any of us have set for us, yet we keep striving to like be the guy in control who has all the answers and has like you look at all the clickbait stuff on the internet, which I get sucked into, and it's like 6 top, secrets to perfect abs or whatever the thing is. Like there's always somebody has this perfect secret that makes everything simple and easy and you can control, and it's like, dude, that's just not any of our lived experience like ever, but we strive for it because I think it's rooted in that original sin. Anyway, again, preaching.
Well, so Josh, you ended up moving out to Colorado. It was the day after Christmas 2004, right?
Yeah, I moved out the day after Christmas, yeah.
Okay. If that seems creepy, I got that from the Vicar's website. So they put that on there.
Yeah.
I didn't do a deep dive into your life and like memorize dates or anything of when you
knew
moved.
That? I did actually. I mean, that was part of it. Like I was playing in a band and I had my fiance was there and I was like, man, it just feels like this is something I have to do. Like the timing of it didn't seem convenient or whatever, but it was like, man, this is like a step out in faith. And actually I was talking to my dad recently and I had this old Woody station wagon, like with the fake wood panels on the side. And I had like loaded up all of my earthly possessions and like just took off. There's like a bike on the back and like the thing on the roof. And I'm just like, cool, I'm out. I'm like moving to Colorado. And my dad recently told me, he's like, dude, I remember that day you pulled out. I was like, the nerve of that kid, like thinking, like the audacity of my son to think that he's just like going to go and like do ministry and just make it like when nobody ever leaves this like little town that we grew up. Like it was just so. And when I got here, I'm like, oh, everybody else here has done that. Everyone has had to leave their comfort zone. Everyone's had to leave their community, their support system, and they need help. They need a community. Like somebody needs to get after building a community here. Like somebody has to, because they're all out for themselves. They're not going to build community. They just, they're like trying to take. Like, who's going to give in this community?
Well, and that culture is so designed around trying to gain as much status as you can. Yes. That's the ultimate goal. It's like the more status I can get, the more money I can make, right? The more I can achieve. And so even though teams develop, it very is individualized. And very like fighting for that top spot almost. Yeah. Yeah.
And also pleasure. Like just dudes will be like, they'll skip work on a day that we get a little bit of snow. Cause it's like pow day, dude. This is why I moved here, not to work a job, And so most people get fired pretty quickly, but like the idea is like, I'm here for me. I'm here. I'm in this for me, this season of life. I'm here for me. And that it just doesn't last long when you're in a community where nobody else cares about you. Like your family and everybody else, you've already left them. You've like prodigal sunned yourself away and nobody's going to take care of you here. And so it's like that's why I said it's kind of like college town in that like people come, they leave everything they know, but they don't have classes they have to go to. They don't have tuition. They don't have a place to live. Like all of the things of a college town that make it transient. They just don't even have the same amount of support. And so, and it's the same way, we work with guys in Chile and Argentina. We work with guys in Australia and New Zealand and in Canada and across the Alps. And like everywhere you go in these little ski towns, it's the same sort of lifestyle that just isn't it's just not sustainable.
Well,
because there aren't communities there supporting you.
And even with that mindset of like being there for yourself, people they always long to be in community. So for you
100%.
to enter and to try to provide people that community and invite people into that community, and for that community to transform how they see the very purpose of their life is powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, we had this thing going for a while where we would invite the old church ladies to come in and cook, and they would come in like make these just bomb like grandma meals, like just the best, you know what I mean, like home cooked meal. And these kids are like, they're living at Copper where I am. There's a building that has like, it houses like 750 kids, and there's like one kitchen for them to share, you know? And so they're eating ramen noodles or like granola bars or whatever. And so you're like, hey dude, come Thursday night over to this thing that we do. And like, we built this skate ramp, like this mini ramp inside the church. And we're like, dude, come skate. And like, we're going to watch like shred films, and we're going to like, this grandma's like making like super good, like crock pot. And they're like, dude, are you kidding me? And so they'll come and skate and rip and just like meet people who like, actually like remember their name and care about them, and who feed them, and like meet all these physical needs in a place where everybody's out for themselves, and they're like, what is this? Like, you live so different. Like, this is so different than my lived experience in the rest of town. Like, what is this? And we tell people all the time, we're like, the scripture says, always be prepared to have an answer for the hope that's in you, and always do it with gentleness and respect. Always be prepared to have an answer means somebody got to be asking questions. So if you're not living in a way that's making people ask questions, then your opinion's just another one of 8 billion opinions out there. Like, until they experience the love of Christ, somebody serving them and remembering their name and inviting them to a thing and caring about them and filling their belly, like until they experience love, your opinion doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And so when we start to meet needs, they go, oh, I've been looking for somebody. I've been looking for someone, you know? And then that's where they get that sense of belonging. And we still have dudes. I mean, like, there was a guy drove through town like a couple of days ago, and he stopped in. He's like, dude, it feels like we can, you know, I was here 15 years ago and spent a season like popping into these events, and it feels like we like built family bonds. And I'm like, it's because nobody had family here. Like, everybody moved here and just needed to belong. They needed that sense of belonging, and they weren't getting it from their selfish friends. They were getting it from this selfless group of people who were trying to build community. And that's what creates these bonds that are like family. And some of these guys left the industry 15 years ago, and they're still like, they'll call me or be like, dude, this thing happened. Will you pray for me? Like, we build these connections. Like the parable of the scattering of seeds. I was researching that a couple years ago, and I was like, dude's actually a really crappy farmer. Like, he's taking all this seed and like chucking it in the bushes and out in the street. And you're like, these people this was an agrarian society. They knew farming, and they were like, who farms like that? Like, nobody just chucks seed and throws it everywhere. But I think the message that they would have heard, maybe it's not the one that we hear, oh, you want to be like this soil. But I think what they heard was scatter seed everywhere. Scatter seed everywhere. Even when you think it's not good soil, scatter seed everywhere. Your life is scattering seed. And the disciples came back and they're like, what the heck were you talking about? Like, who chucks seed into the road, you know, like throws it to the birds? Like, and I think the message of that is that we're to be scattering seed everywhere, because you never know what soil you're throwing it into. And so if it's with your coworkers, if it's with your family, if it's with somebody who's straight up, like just hates you, anti-Jesus, whatever, like, just scatter seed. Your life is, you're a farmer, and you don't have to be a good farmer. Literally, you just chuck seed everywhere. Drop seeds of truth, drop seeds of love, drop seeds of service, of sacrifice everywhere you go. And you don't know where that seed's you don't know where the good soil is. And so just chuck seed everywhere. You know, spread the love and the truth of Jesus everywhere you go. And who knows? But my job is just to spread seed, to scatter seed everywhere I go. Well, and God will do the work. You know, it'll find the right soil.
How often do we look at someone and think, oh my goodness, this person's good soil, and then you minister to them and you pour into them, and they end up being like the thorny soil where their faith gets choked out and they abandon the way of Jesus. And then you look at another person, you're like, their heart's already hard and nothing's going to hit in. And then all of a sudden they become the people who are willing to give up everything for the sake of Christ. And oh man, I love what you
You
said.
have no idea. You have no, you just have
Yeah.
no idea. We always use the model of when Jesus sends out I think it was the 72. One of the times where he sent out his disciples, he said, when you go into a town, find a man or woman of peace and stay with them, and then teach them everything, and if they don't accept you, whatever, rush dust off. But when you find a man or woman of peace, stay with them and don't go anywhere else. And we use that as like, hey, the dude or the guy or girl that comes to you may not be the coolest. They may not be the one that you like get along with naturally. They may not be the one that you think is the best soil. Mm-hmm. They may not be the one who's the best rider on the hill. They may be the kookiest, weirdest, like most awkward human. But like, if there's a man or woman of peace, somebody who's hungry, stay with them and minister to that person. I've got a story of a dude actually. Yeah, I can tell this. I think I can tell this. So there's this one day we had like just started SFC in the US, and I'm like sitting at a computer all freaking hours of every day. And I was not getting much time on the hill. And so when I would go out on the hill, I'm like, okay, God, I've got like 2 hours. Let me be intentional. And so this one morning I'm like driving up to the hill. It's early season and there's not a whole lot open yet. And, so I go up to the resort up top. It's the only one open. And I'm like, okay, God, the whole drive up, I'm like, all right, God, like, let me meet somebody today. Actually, you know what? Let me meet somebody who challenges me, God. And I'm like, what an idiot. That's like praying for patience. And so I'm like, God, let me meet a person who's like, challenge me today. Go ahead. Like, what a moron.
Give me your best shot.
I get to the mountain and I like spin a lap through, and it's like it had just opened. There's nobody in the park because park kids are usually late comers. And so I blast through, nobody there, whatever. I blast through a second time, nobody there. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do here today, Lord. I've got like 2 more runs in me and I got to go. And so I go up again, and there's one guy and he's hiking a rail. And I'm like, I think this is my guy. This is my guy. And so I like rock up and I'm like, hey dude, you hiking the rail? Like, can I hang out here? And he's like, oh yeah, dude. But I'm like here, like waiting for this guy. And he's like, starts like name dropping these pros and stuff like that he's friends with. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, whatever. You just want to hang out? And he's like, yeah, but like, usually I'm like trying this trick and this one. And he's like trying to like brag or something. I was like, man, this guy's annoying. Like already I'm like, you know what, God, maybe this isn't my guy. And so I like hang out with this guy for like 30 minutes or whatever. And I'm like, hey dude, like just hard to be around. I'm like, hey dude, we do this thing like on Sundays, like, let me get your number. And so I like take his number and he shows up to this thing and he's like bragging about how good he is and all these like pros that he knows. And he's just like super. And people were like, dude, who's this guy that you brought? And I'm like, it was a challenge. It was a God challenge. And like, dude, he just like wants to hang around because he has that like sense of, he wants to belong with somebody. Mm-hmm. And I was the only one that reached out, and I guess. And so dude hangs around for like months and months. And then he comes back next year, and then he comes back. And like one day he just texts me and he's like, dude, I'm going to church, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, you're going to church? And he's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, have you become a Christian? And he's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, when? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? He's like, well, I just like hung around with you guys and it just sort of like wore off on me. And I'm like, wore off. I didn't know that's how Christianity worked. But it was crazy because it literally was a challenge. And it was this person who I did not mesh with. I did not jive with. I thought he was a kook. I like none of the things of like just wanting to like find other people like me or what, like it just didn't. It was a challenge. Like it was a direct challenge to the Lord. And I learned like one of the biggest lessons of my life that day was like, dude, if there's somebody hungry, feed them. You know, if there's a man or woman of peace in your life who's asking questions, even if they're the kookiest, most annoying, whatever, like that's who I called you to. Stay with them. Don't go trying to find like the coolest guy or the best rider or the one who I think will have the most credibility with people or blah, blah. Like people are always saying like, if this one famous person, and you're like, dude, I don't think that's how the kingdom works. You know, you scatter seed wherever you have the chance to scatter seed, and God will do the rest, you know? Anyway,
that's
I
awesome.
love that dude now. We're great friends now. But I mean, like literally like that scattering seed thing has preached to me over and over and over, because you just never know. And like I said, like sometimes I'll be in Slovakia. I'll be in like some other corner of the world. I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? Like, I don't know. We're just going to do the thing, and we're going to share our passion. We're going to share the love of Christ, and the rest is up to you. I mean, that's the ultimate surrender, isn't it? Like the ultimate surrender is going, I submit to you, Lord. Like you called me to do this thing that I think is kooky and I don't even know if it's a real mission sometime. And the people that I sit with on the plane who are like, what line of work are you in? You're like, Jesus snowboarding? Like it's not even a real line. There is no line of work. But like this thing that like has been full of doubts and full of like people just poo-pooing your calling away, and you just go, all right, I'm just going to do it. I'm a weirdo for Jesus, whatever. Like it is what it is, and I'm fine with that. I trust you. I submit to you. And that's the opposite of that control thing we were talking about is like, I submit to you. God, this doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't make no sense at all to me. Like, but your will be done, man. Like this is who you made me. This is what you called me to do, and I'm going to do it. And the rest is up to you. Yeah. And that's the place really where that's probably why we're still here after 20 years. It's like half punk rock mindset. It's like, Alex, you're talking about like ska, punk rock. Like it's half that mindset of like, I don't care what anybody thinks. Like this is what we're going to do because this is who God made me to be, And it's that self-expression of like, this is what we're creating because this is who God made me. And not only is it like okay to do, but it's like, that's beautiful. Yeah. This is me living to like the pinnacle of my calling is doing this weird thing that my parents don't even know if it's a real thing. Like this thing is like, is the pinnacle of my calling. This is me living into the redeemed version of Josh that God wants me to be. And so I don't know.
Well, and now at this point, like this year, come December 26th, you're going to be celebrating, right? Like 20 years of doing that. And that's such a cool position to be in, to be able to look back even amidst all those doubts and to see how God has used you, how God has worked through the ministry. Like you have a buildup of 20 years. What are you celebrating? Like, what are some of the biggest things you're celebrating? Hitting that mark. Because like Mason and I, like we've been doing what we've been doing for, we're not even in the double digits yet. We're getting close, but man, like, so what are some of the biggest things you're celebrating? Being able to look back and see how God has worked through that in the midst of all those doubts. Yeah.
I mean, snowboarding is let's be honest, it's a young man's game. It's, I'm like 43 this year. And, I ended up in a competition recently and like took second place between a 15-year-old and like a 21-year-old. And I was like, I'm older than the two of you combined. Like, I don't
I got second, but I really got first here.
And the one kid's like, he's like, dude, how did you do the blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, dude, I've been doing that trick since before you were born. Like for 25 years, I've been doing that trick. Like, it's just muscle memory. Like, but like, I'm coming to the place where I'm going, okay, like I can't do what I did for much longer or whatever. But like, do I feel like I'm doing justice to handing this off to the next generation? Do I feel like I'm doing justice to like, not that I'm stepping away, but like I'm stepping back and giving to the next generation? Do I feel like I'm doing that? Do I feel like I'm doing it well? Because sometimes I think Western world, we like, probably everybody, we just like glorify youth. And it's like, man, we only ever talk about middle age as if like, it's a real shameful thing. Like
a midlife crisis.
Nobody ever says anything about midlife good times. They only ever talk about midlife crisis. And I was listening to John Tyson last week. It was an interview he did with a guy, and it was like a 2-hour long interview, but there's like this 4-minute window right in the middle where he started talking about midlife. Cause he's like, dude, like your body actually goes through a new process of like chemically, like your brain starts to think differently and your body starts to act differently, and you're in a new life stage and you're in the middle of your career, and like, it's actually a good thing. Like midlife is actually, you've got more resources than you had when you were young. When you were in like your hero mode, you were just like balls to the wall, like just go do the thing, save the world and do all that, And he's like, and you can't do that. Your body literally, every person who lives past whatever, 40, like goes through this thing that's like, okay, when you come into this stage, how are you going to do it well? But nobody talks about doing it well. Everybody just like it's like sort of a taboo topic of conversation. Like middle age sounds so terrible in our culture. And he's like, why don't we train ourselves to do well? Because now everybody hides it, and you're going through this like second adolescence where you're like trying to figure out who you are, and he's like, you're trying to discover yourself. And what happens is pastors start falling. There's affairs, there's divorce, there's, guys buy a convertible, and they're doing all this stuff like sneaking around because nobody's trained them how to do the next stage of life well. And he's like, isn't that a shame? And it was, like I said, it was like 4 minutes of like a 2-hour podcast. I rewound it like 4 times and was like taking notes. I was like, man, that's so good. Like, I should be able to celebrate. I'm here at 20 years into this thing, and like, how amazing is it that we have now a team, where when we first came, it was like 1 or 2 of us, no cash, no support, no churches, no contacts. Like God's allowed us to build up this network, and we have resources, and we're trying to meet needs. And we've got a team of like 8 people. One dude's like in his doctorate. Like we've got like intelligent, skillful, like people. The potential of the thing has come up so many notches. And it's like, how do I now in this zone celebrate the season I'm in? And thank God for, holy crap, you kept us going. You even kept us alive for 20 years, first of all, but like allowed us to do good things and like bring eternity to our culture. Like, how do I do that and hand that off to the next generation? It feels like probably storytelling is how I do it already. You guys have found out, but like telling stories and reminding people, like, dude, one time we had no money. My wife and I burned through our savings like for an entire year. We're like just to trying to keep this thing on the ground because we felt it was right. But it was like we've been through dark, hard sacrifice seasons. And hey, man, like remember how good God is. Like if you look at most of the Bible, it's somebody writing, hey guys, remember what God did. Remember how amazing he was. Remember how he took us through that thing. Remember how he did that thing. If you read Peter's use the words remember like dozens of times. He's like, remember this, don't forget. And it's like, that's my stage of life now is like reminding myself and reminding our crew, like, dude, remember what God has done. Don't forget what God has done because it is so important. That's the foundation. And we're in our modern age, like we want everything like now. And we only think about, like the stories only last like a day because they're not even important anymore after like we social media and all the ways we've been wired is like, if it's not brand new, I don't want it, which is funny because nothing is even brand new. But we wire ourselves to like, I don't know, disrespect the past instead of honor it. And instead of going, man, remember how good God was. Remember that lesson he taught us through that thing. Remember these things. And so I'm in a season now of being like, guys, remember this. Remember the founders always said this. Remember this thing is still true. Remember we watched God do this thing together. Like I'm in this season of like looking back to help the next generation look ahead and grow in this new direction, and not out of shame, like, oh, I'm too old to do this, whatever. But like in this place of like, man, I can celebrate. God's given me 20 years of experience doing this thing. This new guy's coming in and I'm like, bro, let me tell you, like I've got stories. Like that's the stage I'm in. And I'm like trying to learn how to celebrate that and do it well. Cause it's where I am. We only ever have the moment that we're, Yeah. So that's where I am now. I'm the old guy reminding everybody of the past.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah.
Oh. Thanks again so much. Like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, most of the books of the Bible are like, remember God did this. Remember God did this. Hey, we need to write this down because we need to remember who he is and how faithful he's been.
Yeah.
And we're so short-sighted because we're always like looking at looking at like what's right in front of us in our hand, and we like forget to look up because we're so like focused on our tiny little thing. And then you like look up. It's funny, like in the mountains, like right now it's like the leaves are popping. And so it's like yellow, whatever, it's beautiful. And there's like snow caps on the top. And it's just like the dope, like the sickest time of the year in the mountains for like views. And I only ever really mountain bike in the fall, but you'll be blasting through the trees and it's all like yellow and it's like, and you'll come to like a vista and it's like, shaka, and it opens up and you're like, good Lord, like this is insane. Like, I can't believe you created all this. Like, especially because when you're climbing up, you're just like looking down and like, you just forget that. And that'll preach because like we do that thing where we just look down at our own little earthly kingdoms, our own little things in front of us. And we forget to look up. And then you look up and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot how good you are. I forgot how big you are. I forgot that there's more than just this little thing. Dang, I'm preaching. You guys caught me on
That's awesome.
A ranty kind of morning.
No, you were great. I think honestly, I think that's a perfect landing point for our discussion here. So thank you so much again, honestly,
Yes.
for
For
coming
having
and
me.
sharing and
Thanks.
talking. It has been such a joy and such a pleasure, honestly.
It's fun talking with you guys. I'm really excited about what you're doing. I've been listening back through the you guys are going through the priests, talking about being the nation of priests and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
I was listening to that podcast just yesterday, actually. I love what you guys are doing, trying to encourage people, and specifically this series, trying to encourage people in their passions to live mission, man. We're all on mission everywhere our feet take us, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So good.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for doing what you're doing.
And thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%.
We're just making it up, dude. I don't know.
That's all we're doing, right?
We're making it up.
Apologies. Yeah.
But God's got a plan.
Amen.